Today's story is titled Asshole Dragon Greater Than Chosen Ones by user Malachite Rain. Long-time lurker, first-time poster, and all that. This is a selection of events in a long-running campaign that, little by little, compounded into an anxiety-inducing game that somehow went on for much longer than it should have. I don't know if it constitutes as a full RPG horror story, but here it is. The campaign was a few years ago, so the exact details are lost to the fog of time. The cast itself isn't important, but I'll list them for ease of reading. Me, human party girl, Oath of the Ancients paladin. Human, actually changeling, bard, never figured out what college. Wood elf assassin rogue, and human open palm monk. The setting itself is that the world has become wild and only one town actually exists on the entire continent and is slowly being grounded by nature and other forces of destruction, with a few small villages and settlements spread out and barely surviving. We started in one such settlement, but quickly moved on to the town and discovered Jim's magic shop. Jim turns out to be our main quest giver and a potent ally. Too bad the entire party hated his guts for very justifiable reasons. The issues were many, and I'll try and compartmentalize it all into short instances of situations and events that follow. Jim is an asshole, but we're the chosen ones, and the impossible siege. Early on, we were deemed the most competent agents in protecting civilization from the encroaching wilderness, rampant monsters, and bandits? Jim turns out to actually be an adult or older gold dragon who is selling his extensive hoard of magical items. He tasks us to help him protect the city, but won't equip us by any margin. He left us in defense of the city as he needed to go do an errand that he didn't tell us about. Of course, a group of level 4 PCs is more than a match for a whole-scale, out-of-nowhere underdog invasion by a drow army. We did all we could to hold them back at the walls, but they had battle mages that were pretty much turning the walls into molten slag, and we had one spellcaster on our side, the Bard. Heavy losses on our side as whatever archers and warriors the city could muster were being picked off, while all we could do is twiddle our thumbs, give orders in a hopeless situation, and tend to the wounded. I was mustering a vanguard at the gate to prepare for the breach. Dragon Jim arrives in the nick of time and cutscene deals with the entire drow army. He then explains that they attacked specifically because he wasn't present, and still won't tell us what the errand that was so important that it cost a quarter of the city's combat-ready populace and heavy damage to the walls was. Jim continues to be an asshole and the whole world wants us dead. We were then enlightened of the true state of the world. Shit's fucked, and he is the last dragon that is fighting for good and civilization as a whole, with odds stacked against us like it's nothing. My paladin is granted a sunblade and suit of plate that I could activate to gain resistance to all types of damage for a couple of rounds. This was granted in a ceremony when I voiced that if he's gonna be tossing challenges like the Drow army and a few others that always had at least 2 people rolling for death saves, we better have some goddamn gear out of his infinite hoard. We got to level 5 for twiddling our thumbs to boot. It is only after a week or something that he told us his errand was fighting some epic challenge rating 20 or something monster that was becoming a problem, and only he could have dealt with it. Essentially ensuring the drow attack was inevitable and thus our own agency being stripped. He then told us there was an actual kingdom of snow elves in the far north that were being terrorized by a white dragon, and if we helped them defeat it, they'll join us in surviving whatever great conflict Jim was foreshadowing heavily. Do we teleport there using one of Jim's incredibly powerful artifacts? Are we granted an artifact to fly us there if that's not an option? No. Jim is so greedy and selfish about his hoard that he won't give us means of achieving his goals, in keeping the city safe and doing good unless we covered exorbitant amounts of gold that we had no opportunity to even acquire. And so off we went, on foot, while being told we had targets painted on our backs and were expected to survive untamed, magical, and deadly wilderness for a journey of nearly a month of in-game time. Blue dragons, and they're in trees. The journey started off disturbingly easy. The DM has shown himself to make encounters extremely deadly because the only reason we had no losses thus far is because the rogue never got hit, and I was too tanky and got lay on hands. The bard and monk went down and were rolling death saves every single encounter due to massive damage output on the enemy side, and the two not exactly planning well on their positioning or actions. This piece ended quickly as a young blue dragon and two of his blue dragonborn-esque cohorts engaged us at a creek that seemed to somehow flow at max speeds to require checks or be dragged 100 feet or so downstream each round. There was a path of slick stones crossing the creek, and we were forced to engage them because they were just peppering us with ranged attacks. I got dragged downstream because of a shit acrobatics roll on the slick stones, and because the front line was gone, the rogue had to hide and waited for me to return, while the monk and bard were moments before death. Yeah, it is only because of my early Sunblade, absolute reckless use of the smite feature, and bullshit armor that we slew two of the Dragonborn and forced the blue to escape. We then encountered basilisks the next day, which nearly killed me, as well as the rest of the party, with me and Rogue still standing at the end of it. The worst part was the forest we had to either pass through or go around. Going around would add a lot of time we didn't have to our trip, but going through would make us liable to be attacked by medusas, werewolves, and what else. We decided to go around, and the DM decided for us by applying an unbreakable gas in the form of siren song, luring us into the woods on one of our own. To avoid carrying an unconscious, or worse, dead body, we went in. We get attacked by a pack of dozen werewolves. Encounter goes the same way as every other one did, with one exception. The monk got dragged to the side and they started eating him alive. I misty stepped into their midst and began cleaving, but they already tore off his arm by the time I chased them away. We captured one werewolf and tied them up tightly against a tree while they were unconscious. Monk was traumatized and pretty much fucked without an arm, and we began interrogating the werewolf who had reverted into a dwarf. He just mocked us, told us we were weak, and then snapped the ropes without a roll, as far as I'm aware, and casually walked away. At this point, I was so jaded that I didn't even bother wasting time or resources on a single werewolf when I knew it was just going to be turned into another gotcha moment. Traumatized? Get good. With the monk severely wounded and crippled, we decided to head back to either let him rest and recover, or even restore the limb he lost. Jim chastised us for coming back regardless of the consequences by going with a man essentially down, and only used healing magic to speed up the recovery. We asked him if he could restore the limb, and he said that he had no means of doing so. In his entire hoard, he had no item, artifact, or scroll to get the arm back, and told us if we wanted his arm back that bad, go kill this lich and see if he has one. We were level 6 at the time. By this point, we were as mentally and physically fatigued as our characters, and just begged him to just cut us to arriving in the snowy wasteland. But he had one more encounter he had to drag us through first. We were camping a few days away from our destination when we were ambushed by an assassin mage who used animate object to create a cloud of eviscerating daggers. Those dealt so much damage that the poor monk and bard went down quickly when focused, and the rogue would have been down too if he didn't maximally use his longbow's range and plinked at him from a distance while I ate steel. We leveled up to 7 and had to deal with a band of fire giants, who would have curb-stomped us had we not made it a deal of me dueling their leader for safe passage. bullshit armor and Sunblade on a paladin allowed me to win a high-speed slap fight with 2 HP to spare. I should have felt good about the win, but I didn't. The prior events deflated me to nothing. There's a lot more to tell, but it's long enough as is. As I stated at the start, it doesn't look as extreme or egregious as some of the other stories on this sub, not even to me, so I'd rather call this a death by 1,000 cuts.